She was 9 months pregnant when she drove to the construction site at 3 in the morning. What she saw through that foggy window would destroy everything she believed about her
Breathe
marriage.
through it.
But here is the
You're doing
part
great,
nobody
Elena.
expected.
I'm right here with
When
you.
her husband came home the next day, the house was empty, the furniture was gone, his wife had vanished, and his newborn son had disappeared without a trace. He thought she was weak. He thought she was broken. He thought he had won.
You thought you controlled
He
me.
was wrong. This
These
is not
receipts
just
prove
a story
otherwise.
about betrayal.
You're finished.
This is the story of how
do you
one
respond to
woman
the
burned
charges,
her
Mr.
entire
Sterling?
life to the ground
Did you act
and
alone?
rose
What
from
do
the
you say to
ashes
the victim,
stronger
sir?
than ever. But the twist
The
at the
public demands
end,
answers.
the one secret she kept hidden for years, that is the part that will leave you speechless. Stay with me until the very end. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. They say a woman's intuition is a gift. Mine was a curse, because I knew exactly what my husband was doing the night our son stopped breathing. My name is Elena Dawson Sterling, and 3 years ago, I sat in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, clutching a tiny blue blanket that still smelled like my newborn son. My phone showed 47 missed calls from Marcus. I did not answer a single one. But this story does not begin in that hospital. It begins 3 months earlier, in a house that looked like a dream, but felt like a prison. The Sterling estate sat on 4 acres of manicured perfection in Greenwich, Connecticut. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a kitchen that had been featured in Architectural Digest, and me, 8 months pregnant, wandering through rooms so large my footsteps echoed off the marble floors. I had given up everything for this life. My career as an event planner, my apartment in Brooklyn, my friends who slowly stopped calling after I moved to the suburbs. Marcus said it was temporary. He said once the baby came, we would find our rhythm. He said a lot of things. My husband was a man who understood the power of words. Marcus Sterling had built a real estate empire worth $200 million by the time he was 35. He could walk into a room full of skeptical investors and walk out with a check. He could convince a city council to approve a development that would displace hundreds of families and make them believe they were doing those families a favor. And he had convinced me, a girl from a middle-class family in Ohio, that I was special, that I was different from all the women who threw themselves at him, that he would love me forever. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The morning everything changed started like any other. I woke up alone. Marcus had left for the office before dawn as usual. I made myself tea that I could not drink because of the heartburn. I reviewed the guest list for the baby shower that Marcus had insisted on throwing. 200 guests, $50,000. Imported flowers from Holland. A 5-tier cake shaped like a carousel. I had wanted something small, maybe 10 friends in our backyard with store-bought cupcakes. But Marcus said the Sterling name demanded a certain standard. The Sterling name. I had taken that name with such pride 3 years ago. Now it felt like a chain around my neck. My phone buzzed. It was Carla Mitchell, my only real friend left from my old life. She was a nurse at Mount Sinai, and she was the one person who had not abandoned me when I moved to Connecticut. Hey, Mama, the text read, still coming over to help you set up for Saturday. Need me to bring anything besides my sparkling personality? I smiled for the first time that day. Just yourself, I typed back. And maybe some sanity. I am drowning in flower arrangements. That afternoon, Carla arrived in her beat-up Honda Civic, looking magnificently out of place in my circular driveway. She was wearing scrubs and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted and beautiful and real in a way that nothing in my life felt anymore. She hugged me carefully, mindful of my enormous belly. Girl, you look like you are about to pop. How are you feeling? I am fine, I said automatically. Carla pulled back and looked at me with those sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. That is the 3rd time you have said you are fine in the last week. And every time you say it, you look less fine. What is going on? We walked into the house, and I started showing her the decorations that the event company had dropped off. Centerpieces made of white roses and baby's breath, silk ribbons in powder blue, crystal vases that cost more than my first car. Elena, Carla said, stopping me mid-sentence, when is the last time Marcus helped with anything? The question caught me off guard. He is busy with the Henderson deal, I said. I do not want to be a burden. Carla set down the ribbon she had been examining. Listen to me. A marriage where you are afraid to ask for help is not a partnership. It is a performance. And you are the only one on stage. I opened my mouth to defend Marcus, but the words would not come. Because somewhere deep inside, in that place where women keep the truths they are not ready to face, I knew she was right. The baby shower was held on a Saturday in September. The weather was perfect. The decorations were flawless. And I stood at the entrance of the tent we had erected on the back lawn, greeting guests with a smile that made my face ache. Marcus was late. He had texted that he was stuck in a meeting. I told myself it was fine. I told myself he would be there soon. I told myself all the lies that women tell themselves when they are not ready to see the truth. The guests mingled. They cooed over the gifts. They placed their hands on my belly without asking, as if my body had become public property the moment I became pregnant. And through it all, I kept watching the driveway. Then I heard two women whispering behind the dessert table. They did not know I was close enough to hear. Did you see his assistant, the blonde one? She has been at every company event lately. I heard they were at the Ritz last Tuesday. My sister works in housekeeping there. She said they were in the penthouse suite until midnight. My hand went to my belly. The baby kicked hard, as if he could sense my distress. I forced myself to keep smiling. I forced myself to keep breathing. And I filed those words away in my heart like a knife I was not ready to use. Marcus arrived an hour later, and he was not alone. She walked 2 steps behind him, carrying a gift bag with a pink ribbon. She was young, maybe 26. Blonde hair that fell in perfect waves. A dress that showed exactly the right amount of leg. She moved like she owned the world, and when she looked at me, there was something in her eyes that I could not quite name. Marcus kissed my cheek. Sorry I am late, baby. The Henderson meeting ran long. This is Jessica Lane, my executive assistant. She offered to help carry the gift. Jessica extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her smile was perfect, and her eyes never left my face. You must be so excited, she said. Marcus talks about the baby constantly. He says he hopes it is a boy, someone to carry on the Sterling name. I watched how she said my husband's name. I watched how her fingers brushed his arm when she handed him a drink. I watched how he looked at her when he thought I was not paying attention. And I knew with the certainty that comes from being a woman, from having that ancient intuition that men dismiss as paranoia. I knew that my husband was sleeping with this woman. I knew that my marriage was a lie. I knew that the life I had built was crumbling beneath my feet. But I said nothing. I smiled. I thanked her for the gift. I played the perfect hostess for 3 more hours. That night, after the guests had gone and the caterers had cleaned up and Marcus had fallen asleep beside me, I lay in the darkness with my hands on my belly, and I made a decision. I was not going to confront him. I was not going to scream or cry or throw things. I was going to wait. I was going to watch. And when the time was right, I was going to protect myself and my son in a way that Marcus Sterling would never see coming. I just did not know that before I could save myself, I would have to survive the worst night of my life. 2 weeks after the baby shower, I woke up at 3 in the morning with the urgent need to use the bathroom. This had become routine in my 9th month of pregnancy. What was not routine was reaching across the bed and finding Marcus's side empty and cold. I lay there for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. No shower running, no light under the bathroom door. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and checked his location. Marcus and I shared our locations with each other. It was something he had suggested early in our marriage, back when I still believed transparency meant the same thing as trust. His little blue dot pulsed on the screen, showing him at the Henderson construction site on the other side of town. At 3 in the morning, something told me to check. Maybe it was that intuition I mentioned. Maybe it was the whispered conversation I had overheard at the baby shower. Maybe it was the way my heart had been quietly breaking for weeks, and I needed to see the final blow with my own eyes. I pulled on a bathrobe over my nightgown. I slipped my swollen feet into slippers, and I drove across town in the darkness, my pregnant belly pressed against the steering wheel, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The construction site was dark except for the security lights around the perimeter. But Marcus's Mercedes was parked behind a trailer in the back. And next to it was a white BMW that I recognized from the company parking lot. Jessica Lane's car. I parked on the street and walked toward the trailer on shaking legs. The September night was cool, but I was sweating. Every step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. The windows of the trailer were fogged, but there was a small gap in the curtains. I pressed my face close to the glass, and I saw them. They were on a couch in the corner of the trailer office. Her blonde hair was spread across a pillow. His face was buried in her neck, and the way he was looking at her, the way his hand moved down her body, it was the way he used to look at me. I dropped my keys. The sound was small, just metal hitting gravel, but in the silence of the night, it might as well have been a gunshot. Marcus's head snapped up. Through the foggy glass, our eyes met. For one eternal second, nobody moved. I saw the shock on his face, the guilt, and then something else, something that looked almost like relief, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if he was tired of pretending. I did not scream. I did not pound on the door. I did not wait for explanations or apologies or lies. I just walked back to my car and drove away. The panic attack hit me about a mile from the construction site. My chest tightened until I could not breathe. My vision blurred with tears I could not control. The baby was kicking frantically, responding to my stress, and I had just enough presence of mind to pull over to the side of a dark road before I completely fell apart. I called Carla. No answer. She was working the night shift. I called my mother-in-law, Diane Sterling. I know it sounds crazy calling the mother of the man who had just destroyed me, but I was desperate. I was pregnant. I was alone on a dark road at 3 in the morning, and I did not know what else to do. She answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was sharp with irritation. Elena, do you have any idea what time it is? I was crying so hard I could barely speak. I just saw Marcus. He was with. I do not know what to do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Diane spoke again, her voice was cold and controlled. Elena, I am going to say this once. My son provides for you. He gave you that house, that car, that baby. Whatever you think you saw, you need to forget it. Do you understand? Sterling women do not make scenes, we endure. The line went dead. I sat in my car on that dark road for almost an hour. The baby eventually stopped kicking. My tears eventually stopped falling. And something inside me, something that had been soft and hopeful and naive, turned to stone. Marcus did not come home that night. He texted at 6 in the morning saying he had slept at the office because the Henderson deal was closing. He said he would be home for dinner. He said he loved me. I did not respond. Over the next week, I did something that surprised even myself. I did not confront him. I did not cry when he walked through the door. I smiled. I cooked his favorite meals. I let him rub my feet and talk about baby names. William, he said one evening, his hand on my belly, after my grandfather. What do you think? I think that is beautiful, I said, and I watched his face for any sign of guilt or shame. There was nothing. He was so convincing, so genuinely warm, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined everything. That night I called Carla and told her what I was thinking. Maybe I overreacted, I said. He has been so sweet lately. Maybe it was nothing. Carla's response was immediate and fierce. Honey, I've seen this 100 times in the ER. Women who get hit, then their man brings flowers. You know what we call that? The cycle. He is not being sweet. He is managing you. Trust your gut, not his performance. But even as she spoke, I was already making plans. Not plans to confront, not plans to leave, plans to protect myself and my son when the time was right. I started secretly copying financial documents. I recorded conversations on my phone. I moved my personal inheritance, the $50,000 my grandmother had left me, into a separate account that Marcus did not know about. And I researched divorce lawyers. The one I found was named Miranda Blake. Her website described her as a family law attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces. The reviews called her a shark. One former client wrote that Miranda had gotten her everything she deserved and made her cheating husband wish he had never been born. I saved her number in my phone under the name Prenatal Yoga. 2 weeks before my due date, I went into labor. It started at 4 in the afternoon with a cramping sensation that I thought was just another Braxton Hicks contraction. By 6, the cramps were coming every 15 minutes. By 8, I knew this was real. I called Marcus. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I called his office. His assistant said he had left for a dinner meeting and she did not know when he would be back. His assistant, Jessica Lane. I called Carla, but she was in surgery and could not answer. I called Diane, but she said she was at a charity event in the city and could not possibly leave. At 9:30, I called an Uber and rode to the hospital alone. The labor was 18 hours of agony. The nurses kept asking where my support person was. I kept saying he was coming. He is coming. He will be here soon. He never came. Baby William was born at 11:47 at night, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, eyes that would later turn the same brown as mine. The nurses placed him on my chest, and I wept with a mixture of joy and devastation that I cannot describe. I took a photo of my son. I sent it to Marcus with 3 words. Your son is here. Where are you? The message showed as read within seconds. There was no reply. Marcus showed up the next morning at 10, carrying an enormous teddy bear and a bouquet of roses. His smile was bright. His excuses were ready. My phone died, baby. I was in a dead zone at the site. I came as soon as I got your message. I am so sorry. But I am here now. Let me see my son. I was too exhausted to fight. I was too drugged with hormones and pain medication to do anything but hand him the baby and watch as he made all the right faces and said all the right things. Then the door opened and Jessica Lane walked in. She was carrying a gift bag with a pink ribbon. Her smile was sympathetic. Her eyes were triumphant. Marcus asked me to pick this up, she said. Congratulations, Elena. He is beautiful. I watched her hand the gift to Marcus. I watched their fingers touch. I watched the look that passed between them. A look that said they thought they had won. Get out, I said. My voice was quiet, but something in it made the nurses stop what they were doing. Marcus laughed nervously. Elena, she was just trying to help. I said, get out, both of you, now. I was shaking. My blood pressure was spiking. The monitors started beeping. Nurses rushed to my side. Marcus and Jessica left. But as they walked out, I saw her hand brush his back. A gesture of comfort. A gesture of intimacy. A gesture that told me everything I needed to know about where my husband had been while I was bringing his son into the world. After they were gone, the elderly woman in the bed next to mine leaned over. Her name was Dorothy Coleman, and she had been there for a hip replacement. Honey, she said with a knowing smile, I have been married 4 times. That woman has homewrecker written all over her. You want me to trip her with my IV pole? I laughed through my tears. It was the first genuine laugh I had had in weeks, and it was the last laugh I would have for a very long time. The first 2 weeks at home with William should have been the happiest of my life. Instead, they were a slow descent into a darkness I could not name. Marcus went back to work the day after we came home from the hospital. He said the Henderson deal was at a critical stage. He said he would make it up to me. He said a lot of things that I no longer believed. I was alone in that enormous house with a newborn who seemed to cry every hour. I was not sleeping. I was barely eating, and I was crying constantly for reasons I could not explain. One night around 2 in the morning, I was sitting in the nursery trying to feed William. He was fussy and would not latch. My breast ached, my stitches burned, and I looked down at my son's face, this perfect little person I had wanted so badly, and I felt nothing. No love, no joy, no connection, just an emptiness so vast it terrified me. I called Carla the next morning. I cannot stop crying, I said. I look at William and I feel nothing. What is wrong with me? Carla came over that afternoon. She took one look at me and her face went pale. Elena, this is not just sadness. This might be postpartum depression. You need to see a doctor. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother had postpartum depression after she had me. She never got help. She thought she could handle it on her own. When I was 5 years old, she walked into the garage, closed the door, and never walked out. Carla, I said, my voice breaking, I cannot be my mother. I cannot. She held my hands tightly. You are not your mother, but you need help, now. I saw a psychiatrist the following week. She confirmed what Carla had suspected. Postpartum depression, complicated by the stress of my marriage and the trauma of giving birth alone. She prescribed medication and therapy. She told me that with treatment, most women recovered fully within a few months. I started taking the pills. I started seeing a therapist twice a week. And slowly, painfully, I started to feel like myself again. But even as I was healing, I was also planning. I knew that my marriage was over. I knew that Marcus would never change. And I knew that I needed to protect myself and William before he destroyed us both. I called Miranda Blake. Her office was in Hartford, a sleek corner suite in a building that smelled like leather and money. Miranda herself was a small woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes like a hawk. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The affair, the missed birth, the emotional abandonment. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. Mrs. Sterling, she said, you caught your husband cheating while you were 9 months pregnant. He missed the birth of his child to be with his mistress. And he has continued the affair in the months since. Is that correct? Yes, Miranda picked up a pen. This is not a divorce. This is a public execution. And I am going to enjoy every minute of it. We spent the next 2 hours going over my options. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, which means that marital assets are divided fairly, though not always equally. But the prenuptial agreement I had signed gave me very little in case of a normal divorce. However, the prenup had a fidelity clause that stated infidelity by either party would void the agreement and entitle the injured spouse to 50% of all marital assets plus alimony. You have evidence of the affair, Miranda said. Photos? I showed her the pictures I had taken through the trailer window that night. They were grainy, but you could clearly see Marcus and Jessica. Miranda nodded slowly. These are good, but we need more. We need financial records. We need a pattern of behavior. We need witnesses. Can you get those? I spent the next 3 weeks building my case. I copied bank statements. I downloaded credit card records that showed hotel rooms and expensive dinners for two. I found receipts for jewelry that I had never received. And I kept my mouth shut. I smiled at Marcus. I played the devoted wife. I gave him no reason to suspect what was coming. When I felt ready, I confronted him. It was a Thursday evening. William was asleep in his crib. Marcus was in his study, drinking scotch and reviewing documents. I walked in and closed the door behind me. He looked up with that charming smile. Hey, baby, everything okay? I laid the folder on his desk. Photos, receipts, credit card statements, hotel records, everything I had gathered, arranged in chronological order. Marcus's smile faded as he looked through the evidence. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. Elena, he said finally, I can explain. I do not want explanations, I said. My voice was steady. My hands were not shaking. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. I want a divorce. My lawyer will be in touch. Marcus stood up. His charm was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. You will get nothing. You signed a prenup, remember? I smiled. It was not a kind smile. The prenup that voids in case of infidelity? I remember. Does Jessica? I turned and walked out of the room. That night, I called Carla. I was sitting on my bed with a glass of wine, the first drink I had allowed myself since getting pregnant. How do you feel? Carla asked. I thought about it for a moment, like I just took out the trash. Expensive, cheating trash. Carla laughed. That is my girl. For the first time in months, I went to sleep feeling hopeful. I had done it. I had confronted him. I had taken control of my life. I did not know that Marcus was already 3 steps ahead of me. 1 week later, I received an envelope in the mail. It was not from Marcus's lawyer. It was from Jessica Lane's lawyer. Inside were divorce papers, but not the divorce papers I expected. There was also a document, a marriage certificate, Marcus Sterling and Jessica Lane, dated 8 months ago, 3 months before I even got pregnant, and a handwritten note. Dear Elena, I am sure this is confusing. Marcus and I were married in a private ceremony in Vegas last year. Your marriage was never legal. You are not entitled to anything. Not the house, not the money, not the Sterling name. Just the baby you had out of wedlock. Good luck, signed Jessica Sterling. I read the letter 3 times. Then I called Miranda Blake with shaking hands. Is this real? I asked. Can they do this? There was a long pause. If this certificate is authentic, Miranda said slowly, then bigamy is a crime. But it also means your marriage was void from the start. You may have no claim to marital assets. I dropped the phone. The room was spinning. Everything I had planned, everything I had prepared for, it was all meaningless. Because according to this document, I had never been married at all. Marcus arrived at the house 3 days later with a team of movers. I was in the nursery feeding William when I heard the trucks pull up. By the time I got downstairs, 4 men in uniforms were already wrapping furniture in blankets. Marcus stood in the foyer, directing traffic like he was conducting an orchestra. "What are you doing?" I demanded. He turned to face me with an expression I had never seen before. All the charm was gone, all the warmth. He looked at me like I was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. "You need to leave," he said. "This is my property. It always was. Check the deed." My heart was pounding. "What are you talking about? We bought this house together. We did not buy anything." Marcus's smile was cruel. "The house is in the Sterling family trust. It always has been. You were never on the deed, Elena. You were a guest here." I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. "But my things, William's things." One of the movers handed me a cardboard box. "Your personal belongings are in here. Everything else stays." I looked into the box. It contained my clothes, some photos, William's baby blankets, nothing else. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. My voice cracked. "I have a newborn." Marcus shrugged. "That is not my problem. You have 48 hours. Then I heard a car door slam. I looked past Marcus to the driveway and my stomach dropped. Jessica Lane was stepping out of a brand new Mercedes. She was wearing a white sundress and oversized sunglasses. She walked up the driveway like she owned the place, because according to that marriage certificate, she did. She stopped at the bottom of the parched steps and looked up at me. Her smile was bright and victorious. "Hi, Elena," she said sweetly. "I hope this is not too awkward. Marcus said you would be moving out today. Do you need help carrying anything to your car?" I stood there holding my 3-week-old son, watching strangers carry my furniture out of my house while my husband's mistress waved at me from the driveway. And I broke. I do not remember what happened next. I know that at some point, I ended up on the floor of the nursery, sobbing so hard I could not breathe. I know that William was crying in his car seat. I know that the movers kept working around me like I was not there. Carla found me 3 hours later. I had called her in hysterics, unable to form coherent sentences. She drove from New York in record time and walked into a house that was half empty. She helped me pack. She helped me load William into her car. She helped me walk out of the home I had lived in for 3 years. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Jessica was standing on the porch, her arm around Marcus. They were watching us leave. I moved into Carla's tiny apartment in Queens. It was a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a walk-up building. The elevator had not worked in months. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the neighbors arguing in Spanish. The kitchen was so small that you could not open the refrigerator and the oven at the same time. It was the most beautiful place I had ever lived. Because it was safe. Because no one there was trying to destroy me. But safety does not pay bills. I had $2,000 in my personal account. The inheritance money I had moved was now frozen, tied up in the legal dispute over my marriage. Marcus had cut off all the credit cards. I had no job, no income, and a newborn who needed formula and diapers and doctor visits. I applied for jobs at every event planning company in the city. Nobody called back. I had been out of the workforce for 2 years. My references were outdated. And try explaining a 2-year gap in your resume when the truth is that you gave up your career for a man who was never really your husband. I applied for government assistance. The wait time was 6 to 8 weeks. On my 3rd day at the assistance office, I sat across from a social worker named Linda Patterson. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile. She looked at my paperwork. She looked at William sleeping in his carrier, and she sighed. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, "I see this every day. Women who gave up everything for a man. Women who trusted the wrong person and ended up with nothing." I felt tears pricking my eyes. "Is there anything you can do?" Linda leaned forward. "Let me give you some advice. Document everything. Even if you cannot afford a lawyer right now, build your case. Screenshots, recordings, witnesses. The truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, you want to be ready." I took her advice. I started keeping a journal. I wrote down every interaction with Marcus, every threatening text, every attempt to see William that he made no effort to follow through on. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you about men like Marcus Sterling. They do not actually want their children. They want to control them. They want to use them as weapons, but they do not want to do the work of raising them. Marcus had not asked to see William once since I moved out. He had not offered to pay child support. He had not even asked how his son was doing. But 3 weeks after I moved into Carla's apartment, I received a letter from his lawyer. Mr. Sterling is seeking full custody of William Sterling on grounds that the mother is mentally unstable and financially unable to provide adequate care. They were using my postpartum depression against me. They were using my poverty against me. They were trying to take my son. I sat on the floor of Carla's bathroom that night, long after William had finally fallen asleep. I looked at myself in the mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back at me. I picked up my phone. I opened a text to Marcus. I typed 6 words. I will sign whatever you want. My thumb hovered over the send button. If I gave up, if I stopped fighting, maybe he would leave me alone. Maybe he would let me keep William. Maybe the pain would finally stop. Then I heard William cry. I put down the phone. I went to my son. I picked him up and held him against my chest, feeling his tiny heart beat against mine. And I made a decision. I was not going to give up. I was not going to let Marcus Sterling destroy me. I was going to fight for my son with everything I had, no matter what it cost me. Have you ever noticed how life's biggest turning points often come from the most unlikely places? I think about this sometimes, how the moment that saved my life came from a phone call I almost did not answer. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after I received the custody threat. I was sitting at Carla's kitchen table, trying to calculate how many days I could stretch the last $200 in my account. William was napping in his carrier, and I was staring at my phone like it might magically conjure a job offer or a winning lottery ticket. When it rang with an unknown number, I almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers were usually bill collectors or spam callers or Marcus's lawyers with new threats. But something made me answer. "Mrs. Dawson," said a deep male voice. "This is Pastor Thomas Wright from the Sterling Family Church. I need to speak with you. In person. It is urgent." I knew Pastor Thomas, though not well. He was the minister at the Episcopal Church where Marcus's family had worshiped for 3 generations. He had officiated our wedding. He had baptized William 2 weeks before I discovered the affair. "Why?" I asked. "If this is about Marcus, I have nothing to say." There was a long pause. "It is about Marcus, but not in the way you think. Please, Mrs. Dawson, there are things you need to know, things that could change everything." We met at a diner in Astoria, far from Greenwich, far from anyone who might recognize us. Pastor Thomas was waiting in a corner booth when I arrived. He looked older than I remembered, his silver hair thinner, his face lined with worry. He stood when he saw me, but he did not smile. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him, balancing William's carrier on the seat beside me. "Why am I here, Pastor?" He was silent for a moment, stirring his coffee. Then he looked up at me with eyes full of sorrow. "I have known the Sterling family for 30 years, he said. "I have kept their secrets. I have looked the other way when I should have spoken up. I told myself it was not my place to interfere. I told myself that what happened behind closed doors was between them and God." I felt my pulse quickening. "What secrets?" Pastor Thomas took a deep breath. "You are not his first wife, Elena. There was a woman before you. Her name was Sarah Palmer." The words hit me like a physical blow. Marcus told me he had never been married before. He lied. The pastor's voice was flat. He was married to Sarah for 4 years, right after college. The same pattern, the charm, the isolation, the affairs, and when Sarah tried to leave, the Sterling family destroyed her. "What do you mean, destroyed her?" "They made her sign a non-disclosure agreement. They threatened to have her committed. They paid her off and made her disappear." Pastor Thomas shook his head. "She contacted me last year. She has been living in Vermont, too scared to speak out. But when she heard about what was happening to you, she wanted to help." I sat back, my mind racing. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I cannot stay silent anymore," he said. "What Marcus is doing to you, what the family is doing, it is evil. and I have been complicit for too long. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is Sarah's phone number. Call her. What she has to tell you could change everything. I met Sarah Palmer 3 days later at a coffee shop in White Plains. She was a thin woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and nervous eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. He did the same thing to me, she said. The isolation, the gaslighting, the other woman. I thought I was crazy. I thought it was my fault. And when I finally tried to leave, his family made sure I had nothing. I reached across the table and took her hand. I am so sorry. Sarah shook her head. I am not here for your sympathy. I am here because I found something that changes everything. She opened her purse and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, emails, and a marriage certificate dated 8 months ago showing Marcus Sterling married to Jessica Lane. I have seen this, I said. This is how they took everything from me. Sarah smiled grimly. Look closer. I studied the certificate more carefully. And then I saw it. The signature of the county clerk who had notarized the document. Harold Jennings. I do not understand. Harold Jennings died 2 years ago, Sarah said. This certificate was supposedly signed last year, which means it is a forgery. The room seemed to spin. A forgery? Sarah nodded. Marcus bribed someone to create this document. He has done it before when he divorced me. He creates fake paperwork to scare women into giving up. But if you can prove the forgery, you do not just win the divorce. He goes to prison. I sat there staring at the document, feeling something I had not felt in months. Hope. How did you find this? I asked. I never stopped watching him, Sarah said. After what he did to me, I swore that if he ever did it to another woman, I would help her. I have been building a case against him for years. And now, with your evidence and mine, we might finally have enough to bring him down. I called Miranda Blake that afternoon. When I explained what Sarah had found, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. If this is true, Miranda said slowly, we are not just looking at a divorce anymore. We are looking at fraud, document forgery, possibly conspiracy. Mrs. Sterling, if we can prove this, Marcus is not just going to lose half his assets, he is going to prison. What do we need to do? We need Jessica Lane, Miranda said. She is the weak link. She thinks she is going to be the new Miss Sterling. When she finds out she has been used just like everyone else, she might be willing to talk. I thought about Jessica, the confidence, the cruelty, the way she had waved at me from the driveway as I lost everything. I knew exactly how to reach her. Carla and I arranged to meet Jessica at a restaurant in Manhattan. I told her I wanted to discuss a settlement, that I was tired of fighting. She agreed eagerly, probably thinking she was about to collect another victory. She arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a designer dress and carrying a purse that cost more than a month of my rent. She sat down across from me with a smug smile. Elena, she said, I am so glad you finally came to your senses. I smiled back. So am I. And then I showed her the documents, the forged certificate, the evidence that Harold Jennings had been dead for 2 years when he supposedly signed the paperwork. The realization slowly dawning on her face that she was not going to be the new Mrs. Sterling. She was just another victim. He told me we would be married for real, Jessica said, her voice shaking. After he got rid of you. He promised. He never filed the papers, I said. There is no legal marriage between you two. He was using you, just like he used me, just like he used Sarah. Jessica's face went through several expressions. Shock, denial, and then finally rage. That bastard, she whispered. I leaned forward. You have a choice. You can go down with him for conspiracy, or you can testify against him and walk away free. Jessica did not hesitate. What do you need me to do? The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Miranda Blake compiled everything. My evidence, Sarah's evidence, Jessica's testimony, bank records showing bribes to a county clerk who had replaced Harold Jennings, emails proving that Marcus knew the marriage certificate was fake. We presented it all to District Attorney Robert Callahan. Marcus Sterling was arrested on a Thursday morning. Perp walked out of his office building in front of dozens of witnesses. His mother Diane watched from the sidewalk, her face a mask of horror. I stood across the street with Carla. I watched them put my ex-husband in handcuffs. I watched them push his head down as they loaded him into the police car. And I felt nothing at all. There is something people do not tell you about fighting powerful enemies. Winning a battle does not mean you have won the war. Marcus was released on bail 3 days after his arrest. $1 million paid by the Sterling Family Trust. He walked out of the courthouse in a designer suit, surrounded by lawyers, looking like he was leaving a business meeting instead of a jail cell. That night, my phone rang. It was Diane Sterling. "You think you have won?" she said. Her voice was ice. "My family has owned this town for generations. The judge in your custody case? He golfs with my husband every Sunday. The district attorney? He went to prep school with Marcus. Those charges will be dropped, and we will take that baby." I hung up on her, but I could not shake the cold feeling in my stomach. The next morning, I saw the headline on the local news: Sterling heir released. DACTA's insufficient evidence. I called Miranda Blake in a panic. "What happened to the evidence?" "We had everything." Miranda's voice was grim. "The evidence was suppressed. The judge ruled it was obtained improperly. Robert Callahan is claiming he never received the full file." "The corruption runs deeper than we thought," I said. "Much deeper." I sat in Carla's kitchen, staring at the wall, feeling the hope I had built over the past weeks crumbling to dust. "So that is it," I said. "They win. They always win." Carla sat down across from me. Her face was serious but determined. "There has to be another way. There has to be someone who cannot be bought." I thought about it. The judge was corrupt. The DA was corrupt. The police had already shown they were willing to look the other way. Every institution that was supposed to protect people like me had been compromised by Sterling money. And then I thought of something. "There is one group of people who cannot be bought," I said slowly. "The public." Carla looked confused. "What do you mean?" "The Sterlings have spent decades building their reputation. Marcus is the golden boy of Connecticut real estate. Diane sits on every charity board in the state. Their power comes from their image. But what if the whole country knew what they really were?" "You are talking about going to the press, not just any press." I picked up my phone and started searching. "I am talking about the New York Times." It took me 2 days to find the right journalist. Her name was Rebecca Howard, and she had spent the last decade exposing wealthy predators. She had brought down a tech billionaire who had been harassing employees. She had exposed a hedge fund manager who had been stealing from his clients. She was exactly the kind of person who would be interested in my story. Getting her attention was harder. I sent emails that went unanswered. I called numbers that went to voicemail. I was about to give up when I got a message through her Twitter account. "I have been following the Sterling case," Rebecca wrote. "The way those charges got dropped smelled wrong. Send me what you have." I sent her everything. The forged documents, the evidence of bribery, Jessica's recorded testimony, Sarah's corroboration, and a detailed timeline of every crime Marcus Sterling had committed. Rebecca called me back within an hour. "If half of this is true," she said, "Marcus Sterling is not just a cheater. He is a criminal enterprise. I want to run this story." I felt a surge of hope. How long will it take? I need a week to verify everything. But if it checks out, this will be front page. "There is something else," I said. "The corruption goes beyond Marcus. District Attorney Robert Callahan buried the evidence. Judge Franklin Harris has ties to the Sterling family. This is not just about one bad husband. It is about an entire system designed to protect wealthy criminals." Rebecca was silent for a moment. "That is a much bigger story," she said finally. "But it is one worth telling. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I stayed in Carla's apartment, avoiding any contact with the outside world. Marcus's lawyers sent threatening letters. Diane Sterling called to make more threats. I ignored all of it. And then, on a Wednesday morning, I woke up to Carla shaking my shoulder. "Elena," she said, "you need to see this." I stumbled into the living room. Carla had her laptop open to the New York Times website. The headline took up half the screen. "Sterling Empire Built on Lies. Developer accused of serial fraud against ex-wives. DA and judge implicated in cover-up." Below the headline was a photo of Marcus being led out of his office in handcuffs. But this was not the local news. This was the New York Times. This was national. I picked up the remote and turned on the television. Every major network was covering the story. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They were all showing the same footage. Marcus Sterling, Diane Sterling. The forged documents. My face, grainy and pixelated, identified only as the victim. Within hours, the fallout began. Marcus's company lost 3 major contracts. His investors started pulling out. His partners issued statements distancing themselves from the Sterling name. Diane Sterling was dropped from every charity board she had ever sat on. Old friends who had defended the family for decades suddenly could not remember having met them. The governor called for an investigation into District Attorney Robert Callahan's office. 2 state senators demanded a review of Judge Franklin Harris's rulings. And most importantly, Marcus was arrested again. This time, there would be no bail. I sat on Carla's couch, watching the news coverage, feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. "You know what goes great with watching your enemy's empire crumble?" Carla asked, sitting down beside me with a bowl in her hands. "What?" "Popcorn," I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from a place of genuine relief, and then I cried, and then I laughed again. We stayed up until 2 in the morning, watching the Sterling family's carefully constructed reputation burn to the ground. Marcus's lawyers contacted Miranda Blake 2 days after the article dropped. "Mr. Sterling is willing to settle," they said. "Full custody to Mrs. Dawson. The house in Greenwich. $5 million. And he will plead guilty to reduced charges. No trial." Miranda called me to deliver the offer. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "It is a good deal, Elena. You won." I thought about everything I had been through. The betrayal, the humiliation, the months of poverty and fear. The nights I had spent crying on Carla's bathroom floor, wondering if I would ever see a way out. And then I thought about Sarah Palmer, the woman Marcus had destroyed before me, the woman who had spent years living in fear, too scared to speak out. And I thought about the women who might come after me, the next naive girl who would fall for Marcus's charm, the next victim who would have her life destroyed by Sterling, money, and power. "No," I said. Miranda paused. "No, I do not want a settlement. I want a trial. I want the whole world to hear what he did. I want him to stand up in a courtroom and admit publicly every crime he committed." "Elena," Miranda said carefully, "a trial is risky. If something goes wrong, if the jury does not believe you, you could lose everything. The settlement guarantees you get custody. It guarantees you get money. Why take the chance? Because it is not about the money," I said. "It is about making sure he can never do this to anyone else. A settlement means he pays a fine and moves on with his life. A trial means he is exposed. A trial means his methods are on the public record. A trial means the next woman he tries to manipulate can Google his name and see exactly what kind of monster he is." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I understand," Miranda said finally. "I will tell them no deal." The trial took place 6 months later. By that time, I had moved out of Carla's apartment and into a small house in New Jersey that I rented with money from the frozen assets that the court had finally released. William was almost a year old, crawling everywhere, getting into everything, completely unaware of the battle his mother was fighting on his behalf. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, photographers, spectators who had been following the story. And in the front row, Sarah Palmer, who had driven down from Vermont to witness the end of the man who had destroyed her. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, still wearing his expensive suits, still projecting an air of confidence. But I could see the cracks, the gray in his hair that had not been there a year ago, the hollows under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands when he picked up a glass of water. The prosecution presented its case methodically. The forged documents, the bribery, the pattern of behavior across multiple marriages. Jessica Lane testified, her voice steady, describing exactly how Marcus had manipulated her into thinking she would be his wife. Sarah testified about her own experience. The same tactics, the same cruelty, the same complete destruction of a woman's life for his own benefit. And then it was my turn. I told the court everything. The affair, the missed birth, the confrontation, the forged marriage certificate, the loss of my home, the custody threats, the way Marcus had tried to use my postpartum depression as a weapon against me. I spoke for 3 hours. I did not cry. I did not waver. I looked Marcus in the eye and told the truth about who he was. When I was finished, his lawyer stood up for cross-examination. "Mrs. Dawson," he said with a condescending smile, "you claim that my client is a monster. But is it not true that you stayed with him for 3 years? That you lived in luxury during that time? That you chose to have a child with him?" I felt the old shame rising up, the voice that had always told me it was my fault, that I should have seen the signs, that I should have left sooner. But then I thought of all the women watching this trial, all the women in similar situations, trapped by similar men, asking themselves the same questions I had asked. "Let me tell you something about how abusive relationships work," I said. "The person who abuses you is not a monster from the start. They are charming, they are kind, they make you feel special. And by the time you see who they really are, they have already isolated you from everyone who might help you." I paused, looking directly at the jury. I stayed because I believed his lies. I stayed because I thought it was my job to fix him. I stayed because I was pregnant and scared and alone. But staying does not mean I deserved what he did to me. Staying does not make it my fault. And every person watching this trial who is trapped in a similar situation needs to know that. It is not your fault. And there is a way out. The courtroom was silent. Several members of the jury were wiping their eyes. The lawyer sat down. He did not ask any more questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the verdict was guilty on all counts. Marcus Sterling was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. He was ordered to pay full restitution to all his victims, and he was required to make a public statement admitting exactly what he had done. I watched him stand up in that courtroom, his face gray, his hands shaking, and read from a prepared statement. "I, Marcus Sterling, acknowledge that I engaged in a pattern of abusive behavior toward my former wives. I acknowledge that I forged documents to deprive Elena Dawson of her legal rights. I acknowledge that I bribed public officials to suppress evidence of my crimes. I offer my sincere apology to all those I have harmed." His voice was flat. His apology was meaningless. But that did not matter. What mattered was that it was on the record. What mattered was that no one would ever be able to claim they did not know. As the bailiffs led Marcus away in handcuffs, I felt Sarah's hand slip into mine. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." I squeezed her hand. We did. The weeks after the trial were strangely anticlimactic. For so long, my entire existence had been focused on surviving Marcus, on fighting him, on winning. And now that it was over, I found myself adrift. I received the house in Greenwich as part of the settlement. I sold it immediately. I could not live in a place with so many terrible memories. The sale brought in $2.3 million, more money than I had ever imagined having. I used some of it to buy a modest farmhouse in Vermont, not far from where Sarah lived. It was a simple place, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a wraparound porch that looked out over rolling hills. Nothing like the Sterling estate, but it was mine. William took his first steps in the living room of that farmhouse. He said his first word, which was not mama or dada but dog, pointing at the golden retriever I had adopted from the local shelter. I named the dog Buddy, and he followed William everywhere. I started working again, rebuilding my career as an event planner. At first it was small jobs, birthday parties, baby showers, corporate retreats. But word spread that I was good at what I did, and soon I had more work than I could handle. I also started speaking publicly about my experience, first at a local women's shelter, then at a conference on domestic abuse, then eventually on television. I told my story over and over again, not because I enjoyed reliving the trauma, but because I knew there were other women out there who needed to hear it. Women who were still trapped. Women who thought they were alone. Women who did not believe they could escape. Every time I spoke, I received letters, hundreds of them. Women thanking me for giving them the courage to leave. Women who had recognized their own relationships in my story. Women who had taken that first step toward freedom because they saw that it was possible. Those letters made everything worth it. Sarah and I became close friends. We had dinner together every Sunday, trading stories about our new lives, supporting each other through the lingering trauma that never fully went away. She had started a nonprofit helping victims of domestic abuse navigate the legal system. I donated generously and served on the board. Carla visited as often as she could, usually with terrible wine and excellent gossip about her latest dating disasters. She was the one who convinced me eventually that I might be ready to date again. I met Daniel at a farmer's market 2 years after the trial. He was a high school history teacher with kind eyes and a terrible sense of direction. He got lost 3 times trying to find the booth selling apple cider donuts. I helped him navigate, and we ended up talking for 2 hours. Our first date was coffee. Our second date was a hike through the Green Mountains with William and Buddy tagging along. Our third date was dinner at a restaurant where Daniel spilled soup on his shirt and laughed so hard he snorted. He was nothing like Marcus. He did not try to impress me with money or status. He did not make grand romantic gestures. He just showed up consistently, reliably, exactly who he said he was. Daniel proposed on William's 3rd birthday. We were having a small party in the backyard, just family and close friends. William was covered in chocolate cake. Buddy was trying to eat the wrapping paper, and Daniel got down on one knee in the middle of the chaos and asked me to marry him. I said yes. We got married that fall in a small ceremony on the farmhouse property. Carla was my maid of honor. Sarah was a bridesmaid. Pastor Thomas Wright, who had left the Sterling family church and was now leading a small congregation in Vermont, officiated. William was the ring bearer. He dropped the rings twice, and both times everyone laughed. It was nothing like my first wedding. No 200 guests, no $50,000 budget, no Sterling name looming over everything. It was perfect. There is a saying that you can never truly escape your past. I used to think that was pessimistic. Now I know it is simply true. Marcus served 3 years of his 6-year sentence. Good behavior, they said. Model prisoner. As if the man who had destroyed multiple lives could be reformed by attending anger management classes and volunteering in the prison library. I found out about his release the way I found out about most things these days. A letter in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping showing Marcus's mugshot and a handwritten note in familiar handwriting. He got out early. Good behavior. I thought you should know. He has been asking about William. Be careful. Signed, J. Jessica Lane. Despite everything, she had kept her word. She had been watching. She had been warning. I showed the letter to Daniel that night. His face went pale. What do we do? He asked. I picked up my phone. We prepare. Miranda Blake was retired now, but she gave me the name of a colleague who specialized in restraining orders. Within a week, I had a protective order that prevented Marcus from coming within 500 feet of me, William, or our home. But papers have never stopped a man like Marcus Sterling. He started small, driving past the farmhouse at odd hours, sitting in a car at the end of our road, watching. I documented everything: photographs, timestamps, license plates. Then came the letters. Long, rambling missives addressed to William, telling him that his father loved him, that his mother had kept them apart, that soon they would be reunited. I turned every letter over to the police. Then came the phone calls. Blocked numbers at 2 in the morning. Heavy breathing. Silence. And once, a whispered voice that said, I am coming for what is mine. Daniel wanted to confront him. I wanted to run, but running would not solve anything. Marcus would find me. He had the money. He had the time. He had the obsession. So I did something different. I called Rebecca Howard. The article ran in the New York Times on a Sunday morning. Sterling heir stalks ex-wife after prison release. It detailed every contact, every letter, every phone call. It quoted the police reports I had filed. It included statements from experts on domestic violence explaining that stalking behavior often escalates. Within hours, the story went viral. Marcus's parole officer showed up at his apartment that afternoon. He found Marcus packing a bag. There was a map of Vermont on the table. My address was circled in red. Marcus was arrested that night for violating his parole. He was returned to prison to serve the remaining 3 years of his sentence. I sat on my porch that evening, watching William chase Buddy around the yard. Daniel came out and sat beside me. Do you think it is over? He asked. I thought about it for a long moment. No, I said finally, it will never be completely over. He will always be out there somewhere hating me, wanting revenge. I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Daniel took my hand. Then we will look over our shoulders together. I leaned into him, And I realized that this was the difference. The first time around, I had been alone, isolated, vulnerable. Now I had Daniel, I had William, I had Carla and Sarah, and a whole community of people who cared about me. Marcus Sterling could not hurt me anymore because I was not alone. People ask me sometimes if I am happy. It is a simple question with a complicated answer. I think about the woman I was before Marcus. Young, naive, believing that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. I think about the woman I was during Marcus. Isolated, afraid, slowly losing myself piece by piece. And I think about the woman I am now, standing on the porch of my farmhouse on a spring morning, watching my son play in the yard with the lawn, while my husband makes pancakes in the kitchen. Happy is a word that feels too small for what I have now. What I have is peace. What I have is safety. What I have is a life that belongs to me. William is 5 years old now. He has my brown eyes and his father's stubborn streak. He does not know the full story of his birth or his biological father. He only knows that Daniel is his dad, that I am his mom, and that we love him more than anything in the world. Someday I will tell him the truth, when he is old enough to understand, when he asks questions that deserve honest answers. But that day is not today. Today, he is a little boy chasing butterflies and learning to read and believing that the world is a safe and wonderful place. I want him to believe that for as long as possible. Carla got married last year. She found a good man, another nurse, someone who understood her schedule and respected her independence. I was her maid of honor. I cried through the whole ceremony. Sarah's nonprofit has helped over 2,000 women leave abusive relationships. She received an award from the governor of Vermont for her work. When she gave her acceptance speech, she talked about the woman who had given her the courage to fight back. She was talking about me. I still speak publicly about domestic abuse. I still receive letters from women who are trapped. I still tell my story over and over because the more it is told, the harder it becomes to ignore. And sometimes late at night, I think about the woman who walked into that construction site trailer and saw her world falling apart. I think about her strength, her resilience, her refusal to give up even when everything told her she should. I am proud of that woman. I am grateful to her. Without her, I would not be here. Last month, on the anniversary of William's birth, I drove back to Connecticut, not to the Sterling estate. That had been sold years ago, bought by a tech entrepreneur who had no idea about its history. I drove to the hospital where William was born. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, remembering the fear, the loneliness. The moment the nurses placed my son in my arms, and I felt joy and despair in equal measure. Then I drove to the construction site where I had discovered the affair. It was an apartment complex now. Luxury condos with a pool and a fitness center. Families lived there. Children played in the courtyard. The trailer was gone. The gravel lot was gone. There was no trace of what had happened there 5 years ago. I got out of my car and stood on the sidewalk looking at the building, and I felt something I had not expected. Gratitude. Not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but for the journey it had started, for the woman it had forced me to become, for the life I had built from the ashes of the one that had been stolen from me. I think that is what healing looks like. Not forgetting, not forgiving, but finding meaning in the suffering, finding growth in the darkness, finding yourself on the other side of the worst thing that ever happened to you, and realizing that you are still standing. I drove home as the sun was setting. Daniel was on the porch waiting for me, William asleep in his arms. Buddy was at his feet. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. I looked at my husband, my son, my dog, my home. "Yes," I said, "I am okay." They say a woman's intuition is a gift. And they are right, my intuition saved my life. It warned me when I was in danger. It pushed me to fight when I wanted to give up. It led me to the people who would help me and away from the ones who would destroy me. But intuition is not enough on its own. You have to listen to it. You have to trust it. And most importantly, you have to be willing to act on it, even when it terrifies you. If you are listening to this story and seeing yourself in it, I want you to know something. You are not alone, you are not crazy, and you are stronger than you know. The path out of an abusive relationship is not easy. There will be days when you want to give up. There will be moments when you think the pain will never end. There will be people who doubt you, who blame you, who try to keep you trapped. But there is a way out. There is a life waiting for you on the other side, and you deserve to live it. Trust your intuition, ask for help, and never, ever give up on yourself. That is what I learned. That is what I live. And that is the story I will keep telling for as long as there are women who need to hear it. My name is Elena Dawson, not Sterling, not anymore, and I am finally free. And that is Elena's story, a story of betrayal, survival, and the unstoppable power of a mother's love. If this story touched your heart, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Sometimes the right story at the right moment can change everything. Drop a comment below and tell me, did Elena make the right choice? I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, you know what to do. See you in the next one.